Hi, I'm Steve Gompertz of QRx Partners, and welcome to this week's Quality Heretic. Our topic for this week is when do you define acceptance criteria? When you're doing your design, which is taking the requirements and then turning those specifications, right? Design inputs become design outputs. When are you supposed to define the acceptance criteria for what you're working on? It shows up in both standards, 9001 and 1345. In 9001, it shows up in the section on design outputs where it clearly states that those outputs have to include the acceptance criteria. And if we look at 1345, you get basically almost identical language in the same corresponding section on design and development outputs shall contain or reference product acceptance criteria. So that seems pretty definitive, and I don't know why companies miss this because I do see that quite a bit where I see the specifications, then I go, where's the acceptance criteria? And then a lot of times I get it, well, it's somewhere else, or we're going to do that later. And it's like, that's not what it said for you to do. You need to do it at the same time. And so why, right? Is always the question. Well, why do I need to do it at that point? Why does the standard require me? And there are several reasons for that. One is that it's a great self-test when you're doing your design and you're working on your specifications, your design outputs, to ask yourself, so how would I know that this accomplishes what I needed it to accomplish, that this part, this feature performs as needed to satisfy one or more requirements? If I can't answer that for myself, then I have to kind of go, then I don't know that my specification's complete yet. Right? I may have missed some things if I can't figure out to tell somebody how we're going to prove that my design is the right one. Um, and part of that is then it also helps show your intent, right? It's not a matter of, oh, I have to meet a requirement, so here's my design and I solve it. And I kind of go back to, I've said this before in other videos. If you remember back to grade school, right, you probably had that teacher who said you have to show your work, right? You couldn't do the math equation and just give an answer. They wanted to see how you got there. This is kind of the same aspect, is that when you say, all right, here's my design, and here's what's important about it and what we will test, right? In order to confirm acceptance of that design and its intent, right? I more clearly indicate to everyone that I have understood what I was trying to do, right? So design intent becomes more clear. And as I just alluded to, you got to remember what you're doing here in design outputs is you're going to be giving this to someone else downstream to do additional development work, right? You're doing design, taking requirements, turning into specifications. Now they have to develop it and take those specifications and turn it into a finished product, right? Or device. And so you've got a supply chain is to figure out how do I pick a supplier capable of delivering this if it's procurement. If it's your manufacturing, you're going to make something, then they need to understand what's the point of, what are my options for how to make this so that it does what you intended it to do. If you haven't given them the acceptance criteria, they're missing a piece of the puzzle into understanding how do you want this built, right? Because now I don't understand what the output of the manufacturing process is supposed to be. And it affects a lot of downstream, right? You've got, somebody's got a design in process and final acceptance testing, right? So they're going to need to know, well, what is it I'm trying to meet? Your packaging design, your distribution pathways, training people on features, right? Again, if they understood what good and bad looks like through you defining the acceptance criteria, then the picture becomes much clearer to them. And I always liken it to if you were asked to inspect something and they didn't give you the specs or the tolerances, you'd kind of look at them and go, what am I doing? They just measure that, measure those parts. For what end, right? It really solves nothing to just inspect for the sake of inspecting without understanding the why is really what it helps convey there. And I also, if you're doing testing, you probably wouldn't accept a test protocol that didn't say what passing looks like, right? That you say, oh, we'll figure it after we do the testing whether we passed. That's not appropriate either. And so these things all have the same kind of concepts with them. Is that yeah, when you come up with the requirement or the specification, you have to say, so how will I measure that? How will I know that it has succeeded? Um, so the bottom line is, I always challenge people, if you can't explain how to measure your design's performance, right, its intent, then you're not done. You haven't done your job as an engineer yet. You have more work to do, or worse, you're indicating that you don't really understand what it is you're trying to design. I don't see a lot of that. It's usually the other that just, people get lazy and they haven't decided to, they just, oh, I think I got a good solution. It's like, well, prove to me you got it. How would you measure this and what would the criteria look like to show that it accepts? Right. And then every once in a while you get people going, well, yeah, maybe I don't understand the requirement. And that's where you get designs that don't actually pass design validation later, right? Because we didn't demonstrate that we understood what we were trying to design. So as always, love to hear your comments. What have you encountered? What do you do in your organization to make that happen? Do you do anything different? Has anybody got a contrary opinion to say, oh no, we have a process where we do that later on? I'd like to hear, right? How does that work and how well does it work? So please comment as much as possible and let's get a conversation going. Otherwise, I'll see you next week at the next Quality Heretic.